So hello, I'm Cathryn Mellersh, Head of the Canine Genetics Centre at the University of Cambridge, and I'd like to welcome you to this presentation. It's a little bit shorter than some of the other presentations that you might have heard me give, and that's because I'm really just going to focus on one aspect of the Genetics Centre, and that's its DNA sample collection. So let's get started. So over the course of the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to talk to you about the sample collection. I'm going to explain what it is, what we use it for, and why it is so important. So the DNA sample collection, it really is unique, and that's a word that I think is overused, but is entirely appropriate in this example. The collection contains DNA from over 42,000 different dogs, and this collection has been amassed over the last quarter of a century, really. About 220 different breeds are represented, so we have at least one DNA sample from well over 200 different breeds of dog. And some of these graphs are a little bit small. If you were interested in the details, you can go to our website where we have a full article about the Centre's DNA sample collection. But essentially, I'd just like to draw your attention to the fact that most of these samples have come in as buccal cheek swabs, but about a quarter of them, or 20% of them, are blood samples. A small minority are DNA samples that have been sent from other research institutions, for example, and then we do also have a few tissue samples as well. So about a quarter of our samples are from dogs that are affected or known to be affected with at least one inherited disease. About half of the samples are from dogs that are healthy, or they were healthy when their sample was submitted, and a quarter of them we're not quite sure. And that doesn't matter actually, because for all our research projects we need DNA from affected dogs, which we call cases, and also from unaffected dogs of the same breed. And those are our controls. So we do need a mixture of healthy and affected dogs. And this map just shows you where the samples come from. Again, it's a little bit hard to see the details, but essentially you can see that the UK is dark blue, and that means that that's where most of the samples originate from. So about 77% of the samples are from the UK, but we do have some from Northern Europe, North America and Australia as well. So this is essentially a UK-based collection, but it does have relevance to other geographic locations as well. So which samples are in this collection? So many of the samples have been collected for specific projects. So for example, our investigations into idiopathic epilepsy or intervertebral disc disease, or some of the many inherited eye diseases that we've studied. But almost as many samples have been collected opportunistically. And by that I mean that breeders or dog owners whose dog might have developed an inherited disease during its lifetime can choose to send us a sample that we will bank safely. And similarly, vets sometimes see unusual cases or will see a dog with a disease that's not been seen in that breed before, and they are very welcome to send us a sample as well that again we will store safely. And some of the samples are being collected as part of breed archives. So some of the numerically small breeds in particular will choose to bank samples with us just from dogs from the day they're born, and then those samples are available for research going forward in the future. We have a sort of policy that we never refuse a sample. We're always happy to take a sample from any dog, and most of the samples are collected at no charge to the owner or the vet who submits them. Very conservatively, we can estimate that to collect these DNA samples has cost about £500,000 to date, and that doesn't actually include any of the labour costs involved. So that's purely just packaging, the cost of the swab kits and postage. So there's an awful lot of investment has gone into this collection. So what do we use these samples for? Let's talk about that now. So this sample collection has enabled the identification of, to date, 34 different disease variants. These segregate in over 40 breeds, and most of these variants form the basis of DNA tests that are offered worldwide. So the Kennel Club has just issued its health standard, and many breeds will have a DNA test that's either listed as good practice or best practice that was developed using this collection. But that's so much for its historic use. The collection is, very much relevant today and forms the basis of all the CGC's current research investigations and those that we will undertake in the future. So at the moment, we have an emphasis on intervertebral disc disease, many inherited eye diseases, idiopathic epilepsy, as well as, usually a handful of novel inherited disorders that we may be investigating at any one time. And this collection is absolutely crucial to the success of all of those projects. We can also use the collection to estimate the frequency of disease variants in breed populations. And those might be variants identified by the CGC or those published in the literature by researchers at other institutions. So as soon as a disease variant is known, we can go to our collection, pull out DNA samples from the relevant breed and measure how many of those carry the variant that we are investigating. And also, very importantly, the Genetics Centre frequently shares samples from this collection with researchers at other institutions. So that means the collection contributes very actively to research that is being undertaken worldwide for the benefit of dogs. So I'd like to talk now about just what is involved with this collection and its maintenance. So the Genetics Centre employs one full-time member of staff who manages the DNA sample collection and one part-time member of staff who manages the epilepsy samples alone. Data for all the samples are collated in a bespoke in-house database that was developed and is maintained and developed by another member of the Genetics Centre as well. So there are staff time and computer costs involved for that aspect. We mail out about 2,000 DNA collection kits a year, sometimes more than that. And so there's all the packaging materials and the postage that need to be sourced as well. And finally, every one of those samples is stored in a freezer, either a -20 freezer or a -80 freezer. And those freezers are monitored and have to be replaced from time to time as well. I thought it might be interesting just to have a peek inside these freezers for you so you can see what these samples physically look like. So here are two of our freezers. These are scientific freezers, so they are not just the sort of freezer you might have in your kitchen. They cost about £1,000 each. This is one of the freezers that contains the swabs. So each one of these boxes looks like this inside, contains 81 small tubes, and each one of those tubes contains swab from a different dog. And this freezer that you can see, those boxes are about 3 deep. So there's lots of boxes inside each freezer. And then once the DNA has been extracted from those swabs, they are stored in racks like this. These are stored in alphabetical order. I think this is the L shelves of the freezer. And inside one of those boxes, these actually happen to be Lancashire Heeler samples as well. And then just to make another point, so on the front of each freezer is a poster with the names of 3 members of the genetics team and their personal mobile phone numbers. And that's because these freezers are monitored, and these members of staff will get a call 24/7 if one of these freezers has a problem, if its temperature deviates, or if it breaks down. So I'd just like to use the next slide to talk about the role of the sample manager. So this is Brian. He manages this collection. Many of you will have had exchanged emails or had telephone conversations with Brian. He has worked with me for nearly 20 years looking after this collection. And then Jim Johnson is also a member of the group, and he is the person who manages the epilepsy samples specifically. So it's the role of the sample manager to mail out DNA collection kits when anybody requests one, and they may be mailed out one at a time, two at a time, or sometimes in boxes of 50 or 100 to the breed health coordinator, for example, who may want to distribute a batch to their members. All of those samples come back to us. They have to be processed when they are returned. Details about each dog and all the clinical data is entered into the database. This is somewhat automated, but there's still a lot of manual involvement as well. And then Brian spends a lot of time following up health information for these samples. And that might be phoning owners or emailing owners regarding the health of their dog a few years after the sample has been submitted to us, or maybe following up with veterinarians if there was some more clinical information that is needed. So that is a sort of ongoing process for all of the samples, and it ensures that our samples are what we call research ready, so information pertaining to each one is as up to date as it can be at any one time. Brian will also prepare subsets of samples at the start of each one of our new projects. And then he also extracts data and processes samples to share with collaborators. Just this week, we've been extracting DNA from whippet samples to send and share with Professor Tosso Lieb at the University of Bern in Switzerland for a new project that he is undertaking on whippets. And both Brian and Jim answer an awful lot of inquiries. They are there available really for anybody who wants to know about submitting a sample, how to do it, which samples are useful for which projects, etc. So what does all of this cost? So as I've explained, we have staff costs involved, we have computing costs, there's the cost of the swab collection kit materials, we have postage, and we also have freezers. They need to be replaced from time to time, and then we do spend about £2,000 a year on the monitoring service. So all of that in 2025 will come to about £78,000, which is about £1.86 for each sample in the collection. And I'll point out that those figures actually exclude our current epilepsy research sample collection, which is currently being funded by the stakeholder breeds, and we're very, very grateful to those breeds for their financial contribution to this. And essentially, the Genetics Centre needs help to fund this DNA sample collection. As I've explained in previous presentations, myself and members of my team are continually applying for grant funding, and we are having, some success with that process. But grants are usually breed-specific or disease-specific, and to source funding for general resources is very challenging, especially once those resources have been developed, which is the state that we're in with the DNA collection now. And as I hope I've shown you and convinced you, funding is required to manage this collection, to add new samples to it and to develop the database. And if these costs aren't met, this collection cannot be actively managed. And that essentially means that this vital canine resource will effectively be lost. I think we can ask the question, who should cover the costs of maintaining the Genetics Centre's DNA collection? And the answer might be, dog welfare charities and organisations, or breed clubs, or individual breeders and owners. And I think there's a very good argument that all of these stakeholder groups have a responsibility to help cover the costs of maintaining the DNA collection. And as I've said many times before, if the cost is shared, it becomes less onerous for each one of these individual stakeholder groups. So if you're listening to this and you can appreciate the value of this DNA sample collection and would like to contribute, there's several ways in which you can donate, either as an individual or as a club or an organisation. The easiest way to investigate is probably to head to our website. There's details on the website about all the different ways in which you can make a donation, and hopefully they're all fairly self-explanatory. We do have a dedicated Just Giving page. The address is here. I think if you search for Canine Genetics Just Giving, you'll find this picture of these two spaniels. You know you're in the right place. That's another way to give. I will add that we do lose a small fraction of donations made via the Just Giving page as fees to Just Giving. We also do have our quite new regular giving scheme, which is called the Friends of the CGC. So individuals can become a friend of the CGC, and we would love to encourage you to do that. To become a friend, you just simply set up a monthly direct debit for £5 a month or more and allow us to claim gift aid if that is appropriate. And this is a really great way for you to contribute on a regular basis to the CGC, and it really helps us because we have an idea of the sort of predicted income. We certainly welcome one-off donations as well, but these regular donations do really enable us to plan for the future and predict what our income is going to be over the next sort of month and years ahead. To thank you for being our friend, we have a couple of tokens of thanks. We will send everybody who becomes a friend of the CGC a lapel pin like this for you to wear and hopefully help to share the message. And then another small token of our gratitude, you will be able to nominate somebody that you know for the new Friends of the CGC Health and Welfare Award. This is sponsored by Canine Genetic Testing, which is our own commercial DNA testing service at the University of Cambridge. So you can tell us about somebody you know personally or who you know of who makes a positive impact on the health and welfare of dogs in any way at all. And the winner is going to be awarded at the Canine Genetics Research Day, which will be held in Cambridge on March the 21st. And details of that and the opportunity to reserve tickets will be available very shortly. Just keep an eye on our social media platforms for that. And that's all I wanted to say, really. I hope I have convinced you that the Canine Genetics DNA sample collection is an important, unique, shared and essentially irreplaceable resource that exists for all dogs. And so please, if you are able, help us to safeguard it for all the dogs that share your lives now and that will do in the future. Thank you very much for listening.